Thank you, Herlock. Minister, as I'm sure you can imagine, with all the focus on the mother and baby homes and the issue of adoption over the past few weeks, voluntary organisations are being inundated with requests for support from adoptees and from their birth relatives and from the wider group of people affected by the mother and baby homes. Groups like the Adoption Rights Alliance are trying to help as many people as they can, but they've been completely overwhelmed by the number of people that need assistance and that need quite sensitive support and counselling support and things like that. Women who maybe haven't talked about some of these issues in a long time, women who went through the homes or who were forced to separate from their children many years ago, haven't told their families, their husbands, their children, have dealt with all of this themselves, the emotion of all of that themselves for a long, long time, and now we're reaching out for the first time and looking for someone to talk to. And the services simply aren't there to help everybody who needs support. That's the feedback I've been getting very strongly from different groups involved. Barnados provide a fantastic service. I think they're the only independent service outside the HSE and other state organisations for adopted adults and their birth relatives, but they only have funding from the HSE for one post for their post-adoption services, which obviously is, again, will be completely insufficient. I tabled this debate yesterday. I saw the Minister for Children issued a press release today referring to a number of services that are available. He referred to the HSE helpline. I actually rang the helpline to see was that a new service or an existing one, and they told me that it's the general HSE helpline that's there to deal with people with different HSE issues, but that they can refer people on to more specific services. The press release also refers to the Connect free telephone out of hours professional service. I understand that that service was set up for people who suffered abuse in residential institutions, and again would be specialised in dealing with those people who are in the industrial homes and things like that around the country. And the press release also refers to the National Counselling Service, again the existing HSE National Counselling Service, which is usually there to help people with survivors of institutional abuse. So my query, Minister, is, are new services being put in place? Are additional posts being put in place? Because the feedback that I have had very strongly over the last week is that the existing services are not sufficient. And that people are reaching out for support but not finding that services are there to respond. And I suppose I would stress, particularly because I was fortunate enough to find my mother and to connect with her through Barnados. Their service is phenomenal. It's an incredibly good service to provide people with helpline assistance, but individual one-to-one counselling, which is crucial in these situations. So I was shocked actually to hear that they only have one person. That's the result. They had more as a result of cuts over the last few years. But I think the government should step in straight away and provide them with more funding so that nobody is looking for help and having to be turned away. I also want to raise the issue, Minister, of access to birth certs. Adopted people in England have had a right to their birth certs since 1975. 40 years later, Irish adoptees still don't have that right. The Taoiseach said last week that introducing such a right in Ireland might require a referendum. I've actually done a lot of reading into this. I read the main Supreme Court case, which is the IOT&B case, and also the article that was printed on it last week by Conor O'Mahony, who's a constitutional law expert in Cork. And Conor has argued very persuasively that a referendum is not needed. In fact, he has highlighted sections of the judgment in that case where the court said that if it referred to the fact that, of course, there are competing rights. There's the right to privacy on the one hand of the mother and the right to identity of the child. The court said that neither was absolute, but that it was a job for the Oireachtas, for members of this House and members of the Dáil, to strike that balance, and the courts would only interfere. The legislation would benefit from the same presumption of constitutionality as all legislation does when it leaves the Oireachtas, and the courts would only interfere if they felt that it was unreasonable. So I think the Supreme Court has clearly said to us as politicians that it is our job to legislate here. I appreciate that it's a sensitive issue, but that hasn't stopped other countries from putting in place a system. And it's hard to describe to you, it's hard to describe to anybody the hurt that comes from, as an adoptee, not knowing who you are. I didn't find my mother for 29 years. I didn't know my original birth name for 29 years, any of the circumstances in which I was born. And it's hard to explain that gap to anybody, but all I can say to you, Minister, is that there are thousands of people around this country today that have those feelings every day, particularly on their birthdays and Christmas and times like that are living with this pain for a long time. And it's long past time that the state actually stepped up and helped them. So for the adoptees, the basic right is the right to a birth cert, but then we also need a proper, proactive information tracing and support service for both for adoptees and for birth relatives, that kind of like the service that I went to with Barnados, where they acted as an intermediary in our case, but they only do that in a small number of services. As I pointed out, they didn't get funding from the HSE for one post, but I think we need to see that replicated on a national level, so that adoptees and looking for their birth cert would apply to that service to get their birth cert, would be offered counselling, would have the opportunity to talk through with the counsellor their own feelings, but also then if the counselling service are aware of the mother's intentions and circumstances and whether she wishes to be reunited or not, and that all of that could be taken into account. I think there's been a lot of scaremongering over the last few weeks about adopted people turning up on mothers' doorsteps unwanted in the middle of the night and things like that. I mean, we're all sensitive people. I think all we want to know is who we are. A lot of it, some adoptees don't wish to reunite. Those that do, I can assure you, are sensitive to knowing that finding their mother could be a difficult experience for their mother. They appreciate that they don't know the circumstances in which they were born, and there could be a lot of pain associated with that for the mother, and they certainly don't want to make their mother's life any more difficult. But that can't be an excuse for just a blanket ban on birth certs. It's not anywhere else, and it shouldn't be here for blanket robbery of people's right to an identity. But what it does call for, and I think in fact this reasons why those type of things happen if people coldly end up approaching a birth relative, I think the reason it happens actually is because in the absence of a right to information through the state and proactive support from the state, the only way that people can get that information is to get private detectives and retrace steps and end up going back to the town. You find out what town you're from, you go around the town, you ask people, do they know Mary X, who had a baby in 1973, and you retrace it, and suddenly you're standing on that lady's doorstep or you're writing her a letter. If there was a proper intermediary and a proper support service, that wouldn't happen. So I think there is a lot of scaremongering about that, and I think that a proper service would also be an invaluable support for mothers, that they'd have somebody to talk to. They might still decide that they don't want, that some of them don't want to reunite, but my understanding, and I've met with one of the mothers groups yesterday, Adoption Loss, is that they feel that often that is overstated. Sometimes there's talk in public debate of the fact that mothers sign confidentiality agreements. Adoption Loss, or mothers group, have strongly pointed out that in fact in most cases it worked the opposite way around. They were forced to sign consent forms. They were forced to swear oaths saying that they would never try to contact their child. They certainly did not look for confidentiality. So I think it is, I appreciate that it is a sensitive issue. It needs to be handled carefully, but I would urge the government to act on all the different issues that I have outlined, because I think that we need to see a proper, comprehensive response to all of this and finally give people justice for what they've gone through.
I'd like to thank Senator Parr for putting this very important issue before the Oireachtas, and indeed to thank her for the clarity in which she has presented the case and indeed outlined her own personal circumstances, and to say that, that I know that she speaks on behalf of thousands of people actually, and you articulate the needs and the need for the state to meet those needs. I take this adjournment on behalf of Minister for Children, Mr. Charlie Flanagan, TD. Following the government's announcement last week to establish a statutory commission of investigation into these matters, the mother and baby homes, the Minister has this morning, as you've said, announced a series of arrangements to provide public access to further information and counselling services for those needing support in relation to these issues. These services are operational from today, and full details, together with an update on the cross-departmental work to establish the Commission, are available on the website of the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, www.dcya.gov.ie. The Minister is conscious of the demand for information following the recent disturbing revelations in relation to the mother and baby homes. Last week he directed his officials to work with the HSE in arrangements to ensure that the National Information Line can assist people seeking information or details of available support. Those seeking such information may telephone the HSE National Information Line between Mondays to Fridays 9 to 5 1850 24 1850. There is also an out-of-hours professional counselling and support service where those affected can contact the Connect free telephone service and talk in confidence to a trained counsellor. Connect is an out-of-hours service available from 6 to 10 p.m. from Wednesday to Sunday, but it is currently operating 7 evenings per week. I've been asked to emphasise that, 7 evenings per week, as part of the response to these issues affected by the coverage. The Connect out-of-hours service is contactable at free phone 1800 477 477 in the Republic and 00800 477 47777 from Northern Ireland and the UK. The National Counselling Service is also available. The HSE National Counselling Service is a professional, confidential counselling and a psychotherapy service available free of charge in all regions for adults who have experienced trauma and abuse in childhood, with priority given to adult survivors of institutional abuse. Callers to the HSE National Information Line would be connected to a local service. In relation to adoptees, the Government is committed to providing as much information as possible to those who seek information regarding their identity. The Government fully appreciates that the desire to know one's identity or to re-establish contact with a child is a very fundamental and human and entirely reasonable concern. The Minister for Children is pursuing a range of measures, legislative and administrative, in the area of adoption, information and tracing. The constitutional and legal barriers to providing access to adoption records, as you articulated, including birth certificates, without the consent of the birth mother, gives rise to the need for careful drafting of legislative proposals, and this important work is receiving priority attention from the Minister. Any legislation is subject to legal and constitutional complexities, balancing the right to identity with the parent's right to privacy, where prior parental consent has not been forthcoming. The Minister is committed to going as far as is possible through legislation to facilitate improved access. There is also a great deal which can be done operationally to support any new legislative scheme, through, for example, support and counselling to address fears about giving consent to the release of records. The Minister will, as soon as possible, finalise legislative proposals and submit a general scheme in heads of the Adoption, Information and Tracing Bill to Government. A national tracing service will be established under the bill, the operation of which will be subject to guidelines to be set out in regulations. The bill will also provide for placing the National Contract Preference Register on a statutory basis. Subject to Government approval, it is the Minister's intention to refer the general scheme to the Oireachtas Committee on Health and Children for its consideration, where the competing issues can be fully debated. It is envisaged that the Committee's consideration will include invitation to advocacy groups and interested parties to outline their views. Minister Flanagan has indicated that he is looking forward to having an opportunity to engage with members on the complex issues arising in the proposed legislation. He has also asked me to convey his regret that he was unable to attend the Seanad, and asked me to thank you, Senator, for raising this urgent and important issue. He has indicated that he intends to meet with opposition spokespersons next week on the matter of mother and baby homes, as well as with a number of key advocacy groups.
Minister, a brief question, Senator.
Please. I'd like to thank Minister Dow for your reply. I appreciate that you're answering on behalf of Minister Flanagan. But I suppose I would just ask you if you would pass on my query to him specifically about whether the information services are additional or not. I hope they are. It's just that the little bit of time that I had to look into the press release, my understanding is that they're not. I hope that they are, because I think there is an urgent need for extra services, because that's the feedback that I'm getting. And I'm not sure if the Minister is probably getting similar feedback, but I think there's an urgent need for properly staffed helpline. And also, if you could pass on to him my call for additional funding for Barnados. As I said, they do this, they've been doing it for years, they have the expertise, and I've had fantastic feedback, not just from my own experience, but from a lot of the other adoptees and birth parents that I've been talking to over the last while that have gone through Barnados. They can't talk more highly of the service, so if you could pass that on to the Minister. And again, maybe I'll retable the issue in relation to information and tracing on another day with Minister Flanagan, because I would like to tease through with him the legal issues and that involved in it. But I look forward to its reply as referred to. proposals being brought forward before the Committee on Health and Children. I'm not a member of that, but I would certainly be in my intention to attend for those hearings and contribute as part of that process as well. Thank you.
I'd like to assure the Senator that I will speak to Minister Flanagan and ask his private secretary to make contact with you to clarify those very important clarifications that you seek immediately.
Thank you.
Middleton tomorrow morning.